Turing's cyber world. Alan Turing did not live to see it, but he is the one of the immediate forecasters, casting in advance or a priori, prior to any experience of it, today's artificial cyber world. More distant forecasters who projected or threw forward this now global technological marvel include Galileo, Leibniz and Descartes, Aristotle, Plato and Pythagoras. The fascination with the possibility that the world could somehow, in its deepest ontological structure, be reduced to number has a distinctly Greek pedigree. Already Plato showed that any logos, that is, anything that can be said, can be broken down into a series of discrete bits, words, syllables, and letters. These bits, in turn, can be encoded by a number, so that any logos, any statement at all, can be encoded into an unambiguous natural number. The logos itself was cast as the unique feature or differentia specifica distinguishing human being itself, with Aristotle, following Plato, casting the human being as to zoion logon echon, that is, as the animal that has the logos. Ever since then, we understand ourselves as a species of animal whose differentia specifica is language, rationality, reason. This continues to hold even when, in the modern age, the irrationality of the human being has come under intense scrutiny, both philosophically and in modern psychology. For irrationality is a determinate negation of rationality that is not outside the phenomenality of rationality altogether, but belongs to it. For modern science, the human being remains unquestioningly cast hermeneutically as a species of animal, even though its differentia specifica is today usually called cognition, with the cognitive faculty itself being conceived as some kind of intelligent, brain-based computation inside. This shift in turn opens the door for artificial intelligence to come into competition with human intelligence, for they are then conceived to be, in principle, of the same kind. Today we have managed to actually make an artificial world inhabited entirely by numbers that owe their existence to the laws of electromagnetism, a progeny of mathematical physics associated in particular with the name of James Clerk Maxwell. Electrical and electronic engineers have built a global network as an electromagnetic matrix in which binary numbers, that is, strings of binary digits or bits consisting entirely of ones and zeros, are embedded, copulate, and circulate. Each of these binary numbers encodes a statement expressing an understanding of some partial, perhaps even minute aspect of the world. What is a Turing machine good for? The universal Turing machine is a copulating machine that has one bit string, the algorithm, copulate with another bit string, the digital input data, to generate a further bit string as output. It may therefore be called simply a Turing copulator. In general, the algorithm is the so-called male active executable code, whereas the digital input data are the so-called female passive bit string that suffers itself to be computed and changed to generate a resultant offspring bit string. The cyber world can be conceived as being driven by countless myriads of Turing copulators, each equipped with its own algorithmic code and ready to compute digital data input into it, thus generating more bit string output that is either passed on in the digital electromagnetic matrix to another Turing copulator or transmit it as a signal to control some device or other in the world, or provide information to a human. But what are Turing machines copulating algorithmic bit strings with data bit strings, thus computing computable numbers, good for? They are good for automatically controlling movements of all kinds. The movement may be, for instance, the algorithmically steered dissemination of information or misinformation throughout the cyber world to human recipients. It is also common knowledge today that all conceivable kinds of devices, appliances, and machines can also be automatically controlled by algorithms. The cyber world is itself embedded not just in a larger physical world, but in a meaningful human world. The binary bit strings, therefore, signify something. The data input into an algorithm are encoded information of some kind, knowingly pre-selected for such inputting and with an end in mind. The algorithm, the app or program, has been encoded to copulate with certain data on the basis of an understanding of a particular practical situation, such as the need for an automobile to adjust its speed or direction of travel, or whether an individual is allowed to enter a country by a border official. If the situation for which the algorithmic binary code has been written has been misunderstood in some way, the algorithm itself will misinterpret the situation and misguide or even prevent the intended movement. Practical situations pertain to intentional, willed human actions, which are themselves kinds of movement. The algorithm of whatever kind can be regarded as a binarily encoded logos, representing the understanding of a practical situation that is outsourced to a digital device to automatically control some kind of movement or change in the human world. This outsourcing of logical understanding of the world is universally greeted as a great boon for humankind and gratefully accepted by it. The gratitude starts with appreciating the convenience of being able to algorithmically control movement through to the gratitude felt for life-saving digital devices that automatically correct or inform about malfunctions in bodily organs. In particular, the state is grateful for the surveillance opportunities algorithmic control affords. Algorithmic computation itself is a kind of effective movement that can be conceived in terms of inferential changes to bits in bit strings resulting from copulation. The digitally encoded algorithm itself is a starting point for this computational movement that is ready to receive and compute binary input data to produce a result in the form of an output bit string somewhere in the cyber world. This output may then be passed on. The cyber world and its automated effects on the environing physico-human world is thus set up and works in a causally deterministic way to bring about envisioned, pre-calculated changes or movement of all kinds. That is, as long as the interplay among the algorithms themselves does not sabotage the intended aim. This is the sense of the prefix cyber in cyber world, from the Greek verb kubanan, to steer, to govern. Thanks to the global reach of the electromagnetic matrix that forms the technological basis of the cyber world, it is no exaggeration to say that in some sense humanity has, seemingly, if it were not for the interference between the algorithms in interplay, achieved global techno-scientific cybernetic rule. Greek beginnings. The realized cyber world is perhaps the ultimate consummation of what was cast first of all in Greek philosophy through its centuries-long engagement with a question concerning movement in time. The Aristotelian ontology of movement may be regarded as the culmination of this Greek endeavor to conceive what movement is. Aristotle conceives all sorts of movement and change as proceeding from an origin, a force or potential that, when put to work, effects a change resulting finally in an end product. This paradigmatic ontology of productive, effective movement continues to tacitly underlie all modern scientific endeavour to come to terms with movement, even when the pretension to effective control has to be softened into stochastic probabilistic prediction. Any science lacking predictive power is not regarded as a science at all, and any technology not reliably generating effective change is not regarded as a technology at all. One may say that the ontology of productive, effective movement is undergirded by a tacit, absolute will to power over all kinds of movement and change in the world that maintains its silent sway over the human mind to the present day. This will to power is not the collective will of a collectivity of subjects, but rather a unified, historical, ontological will that has been implanted in and has infected the human mind for centuries and even millennia, with what may be called the techno-scientific mindset. One could also say that this absolute will to power has today been algorithmically outsourced to the cyber world to automatically control movement both in the artificial cyber world itself as well as in the shared human world in which the cyber world is embedded. The one-dimensional linearity of time in the cyber world. The ontology of effective movement relies on the concatenation of cause and effect along linear time in order to control movement and change of whatever kind. Effective causal nexus and one-dimensional linear time go hand in glove, as becomes abundantly apparent at the latest when equations of movement are written down invoking and involving the real variable of linear time, t. Linear time is required to render science predictive. When a movement or change in the world cannot be unambiguously explained by some known underlying causal mechanism, science reverts to statistical probabilities and correlations that still provide some predictive power along linear time. Where no necessary causal connection can be made via an underlying theory, the substitute is the extrapolation of empirical regularities, which is particularly powerful when a large number of observations is available, rather than in individual cases. In the cyber world, such large numbers of observations are available in the form of digital data that are summated into what today are called big data. Such mountains of digital data can be mined to find regularities and patterns that may be interpolated or extrapolated statistically along the timeline into the future. Artificial intelligence. The deployment of algorithms to mine data to discover patterns that can be employed for predictive purposes raises the question concerning the nature of so-called artificial intelligence. Is artificial intelligence truly intelligent? Mining data using artificial neural networks is called machine learning or deep learning, both of which terms suggest intelligence. The learning aspect of such deep learning algorithms refers to the modifications in the algorithm itself that adapts itself according to reaching or not reaching predefined thresholds at nodes in the artificial neural network. The weighted sums of data input at each node determine whether the threshold is reached or not, and thus whether the artificial neuron fires. The thresholds, too, can be adjusted to achieve a better fit to the known training data. Such algorithmic learning aims at uncovering patterns in the training data that can be matched with empirical data fed into the algorithm in order to draw conclusions by way of interpolation or extrapolation. Consider an example. If machine learning algorithms are employed to find deep patterns in the voting behaviour of an electorate, filtered through multiple layers of artificial neural networks that incorporate multiple layers of past data, this may result in the discovery of fine-grained voting patterns, but whether these patterns can be extrapolated into the future for the next election becomes highly improbable. This has to do with the nature of deep learning artificial intelligence algorithms themselves, which rely upon the future being a repetition of the past with more or less modifications. That is, they assume that past regular data patterns will be repeated grosso modo. The voting behaviour of electorates, however, can change markedly because changed circumstances throw up very different political issues to be dealt with that require humanly intelligent voters to assess which politicians or political parties appear more up to meeting these new challenges looming from the future. The mood of the electorate can also change and shift in inexplicable ways. How are data on moods and mood swings of an electorate to be collected and mined at all by an algorithm? Whereas a human electorate immersed in a certain upbeat or downbeat mood looks into the future to assess, perhaps vacillatingly, the prospects one way or another, can it be said that artificial intelligence, which presumably is not in any mood at all, is able to look ahead into an open future at all? That is to say, is AI able to look ahead not merely predictively toward future events, but into the open temporal dimension of the future itself, in which different kinds of events are held in abeyance as absent, including the unforeseen, the unexpected, and the surprising, along with the wished for, the feared, and the imagined. Events held in abeyance as absent in the future may never eventuate in the present. They nevertheless exist in the sense that they present in the human mind's imagination as futurely absent. Could AI ever have an imaginative mind in this sense? The timelessly copulating Turing machine. To approach the question of the intelligence of artificial intelligence, it should first be noted that, according to the Church Turing thesis, the artificial neural networks employed by artificial intelligence compute results that can, in principle, also be computed by a Turing machine. This justifies our going back to the elementary unit of the cyber world, the primitive Turing machine itself, to consider the question whether artificial intelligence is itself intelligent. A Turing machine consists of a scanning head that is positioned at one square on an endless tape and reads, that is, detects the binary digit, a 0 or 1, marked on that square by some technical means. Depending upon the computing rule that is effective at that step, and whether 0 or 1 is read, the scanning head, which doubles as a printing head, will print a 0 or 1 and move either one step to the square on the right, one step to the square on the left, or stay on the same square whilst either shifting to another rule or staying with the same rule. The Turing machine's algorithm is unambiguously defined by its set of rules that must be finite in number. The rules are of the kind if, then. Given that the machine reads a square with its bit while a given rule is applicable, the rules lay down how the machine must move by printing, shifting its scanning head, and shifting to another rule. Such a machine is completely deterministic, given its algorithm and input data, and is satisfactory if it ends finally with a stop rule, after having generated a non-zero bit output. A Turing machine that does not stop and generate an output is clearly not useful, but a dud. With respect to the ontology of productive, effective movement that I have outlined, the potential or force that is put to work in a Turing machine is the techno-practical know-how encoded in the algorithm's rules, plus the technological know-how embodied in the physical machine that is able to detect, print, and shift its scanning head whilst changing its state to the next algorithmic rule. This know-how potential is actually put to work as energy by feeding it with binary input data that it has to process, thus effecting a stepwise change in the Turing machine's state, consisting of the bit string printed on the tape as output, the position of the scanning head on the tape, as well as which rule is then applicable. These steps can be thought of as a succession of machine states at time intervals t0, t0 plus 1, t0 plus 2, and so on. The succession is completely deterministic, generating finally an output of binary code, that is, a bit string, on coming to a halt. It is clearly also an effective, productive movement in linear time. The product is the bit string answer to the computation effected by the algorithm on the input bit string. Is there any sense in which one could say that any such Turing machine is intelligent and open to time like the human mind? One could perhaps say that the machine's scanning head reads the bit on a given square of the tape at time t0 plus n in the present, and that this act is an intelligent one. But the time t0 plus n, where the scanning head is at present, is only a moment in time for us as observers. The scanning head itself knows nothing at all of time or presence in a present moment of time. Its scanning head does not read, but electronically detects, according to technologically employed physical laws, one of two symbols on a tape, a 1 or a 0, which may be simply one of two definite physical states that we humans interpret as a 1 or 0. The scanning head itself is entirely indifferent to when it scans the square, simply because it is not in time. This description of the scanning head's action is our interpretation of it. The algorithm's set of rules, suitably encoded, dictates timelessly, albeit sequentially, what the Turing machine must do. And this must also be physically realized electronically by the machine, based on technological know-how. All the intelligence is in the algorithmic binary code that has already been written by a programmer in order to compute a desired result consisting of a bit string output that, when physically realized in the machine, is also a physical effect that may trigger further movements, either computational or otherwise. The kind of physical movement finally effected by the physically realized Turing machine is foreseen as a spectrum of options from the start by human intelligence that firstly must think through how to write the appropriate algorithm, And secondly, how to realize this algorithm somehow in a physical machine that is able to change its state according to the algorithm's rules. The physical realization of a Turing machine need not at all resemble its simple idea, but nevertheless, it must be equivalent to it in operation. As such, the computer itself is neither intelligent, nor is it in time, but is a thing effectively, deterministically steered by the algorithm and the binary input data. It is we humans who are in time and can envisage what the algorithm is supposed to achieve and think through the computer's algorithmically steered movement along linear time toward this end. But the time to which we humans are exposed is not restricted to the linear time of a succession of present moments. It is the ontology of efficient, productive movement that demands this mental restriction or flattening of three-dimensional time of which we are capable. As I have said, artificial intelligence amounts to pattern recognition within the given data that enables an interpolation or, in particular, extrapolation into the future. But extrapolated patterns or regularities amount to merely copying the past. Furthermore, since the machine learning algorithms of artificial neural networks employed by artificial intelligence can be simulated by a Turing machine, in principle, and the Turing machine is completely deterministic, without an open future, it can be said that artificial intelligence too, in the strict sense, is without a future. Being open to the temporal dimension of the future, however, is the hallmark of free movement, that is, of freedom itself. And it is also the hallmark of intelligence. Each of us, as a self, is free by virtue of being the starting point for a movement toward an envisaged end. Free mental movement in three-dimensional time. The human mind need not be intent on controlling movement in the world, either through technological effectivity or via scientific predictability of movement. In general, the mind also does not move in a way comparable to how a Turing machine works step by step through its algorithm. That is, unless perhaps it is thinking mathematically and inferentially, trying to follow what the algorithm does. The will to power over movement is wedded to linear time, from whose present moment future events are to be controlled, whereas the human mind may understand or strive to understand occurrences occurring in any of the three temporal dimensions, past, present, or future, without any pretension to causally explaining them as if they were, are, or will be causally effected. Three-dimensional time is existential in its openness, say, to the human psyche's fears and hopes for the future, or its regrets, celebration, or commemoration of the past. Many phenomena not occurring in any particular temporal dimension call for interpretive understanding, independently of any will to master their movement. The endeavour to understand phenomena hermeneutically in depth is even prior to any attempt to causally explaining them. That usually also makes do with a superficial understanding of the phenomena in question themselves in the rush to control them. The mind also does not necessarily follow movement and change along the timeline, such as the physical motion of something in the present or a sequence of past events making up the storyline of an historical event, or the sequence of events necessary to realize a plan. For the most part, in everyday life, An individual's mind hops and skips, only apparently in a haphazard way, among occurrences occurring in all three temporal dimensions, according to its own loose associations. One occurrence comes to mind, followed by another from another temporal dimension, and they usually hang together or make sense in some way. Thus their presence in the mind's present focus, whence they also absent from that focus to one of the temporal dimensions as the mind's focus shifts among occurrences occurring in any of the three temporal dimensions. Presencing in the mind's present focus and absencing from this present mental focus together constitute what I call the movement of mental essencing. Such mental essences in the openness of three-dimensional time, and the mind's movement through this openness may be regarded as enabled by, but not caused by, the power of imagination. In particular, a future scenario may be imagined without any pretense to ever realizing it in the present. Nevertheless, such imagining of the future may be a powerful motivation for present reflection and action. The interpretive imagining may simply be a way of getting close to certain phenomena of interest, such as love and hate, thus understanding them as part of the human condition. The same holds true of imagined pasts that prod hermeneutic reflection upon present situations in which similar phenomena, such as the lust for power and boundless ambition, occur. All three temporal dimensions remain hermeneutically fluid. There are also phenomena that come to mind without determinate temporal situating, such as ideas of freedom or justice or of movement itself. A final remark in view of the three-dimensional temporality of the human mind I have just sketched. The well-known Turing test from 1950 consists in testing whether a human, in an exchange with either a computer or another computer, can detect any difference. If he or she can't detect the difference between a computer and a human, then the verdict is that the computer has become as intelligent as the human, and perhaps may have even surpassed human intelligence. This point of view on human intelligence can be turned on its head, however. I suggest, namely, on the contrary, that the true test is the extent to which humankind comes to conceive its own intelligence as nothing other than algorithmic intelligence. For instance, that human intelligence is conceived as neuronal cogitation of the brain that is studied by today's neuroscience. Such a degeneration of human being itself seems to be well underway today. It amounts to abolishing even ourselves